don't believe it, that part.
Yes.
Well, now, Jesus was the only Messiah, the only, in my mind. So at least today, I'm not going to believe anybody who says they're the Messiah because
Yeah.
I don't think. But no prophet, I don't know, like you said, John was a prophet. He wasn't the Messiah. But, so I don't know.
Yeah. I think
How do we tell? How do we? We're still trying to figure it out who it is.
And I think that gets at the heart of, like, this would have been, if you're back here, it's a really alive issue because you really do have false claimants to the Messiah and this other political project. That seems more distant from us, you know. And that's an example of kind of a challenge of reading this and making it alive and present to ourselves. Patricia, and then Heidi.
Okay, I'm really happy I'm born today, or I'm living today, because this is after the fact that Jesus' followers, 11 out of 12, died because they were saying he is the Messiah. They were killed, some tortured.
Right.
And that's a great witness.
Yes. And when we read that passage, watch out for yourselves. This is Jesus. Remember, this isn't Jesus talking to the crowd. This is Jesus talking to
His inner circle.
His inner circle. So watch out for yourselves, you inner circle. They will hand you, and this is what you're saying, over to the courts. You'll be beaten in synagogues, arraigned before governors and kings, all these different things. This is literally, by the time this community is here, this is memory. Peter has been killed. Paul has been killed. You go, lots of these
And
have
probably the
all-
temple has fallen. Peter and Paul killed. All kinds of pain and arrests and killings.
So people would hear this and say, yes, that's in our near memory as the Martyn community is receiving this in our near memory that these leaders going back to the time of Jesus have been martyred for the faith. Heidi.
I feel like one of the things that I always struggle with, you know, like he references in here, some of these false prophets will do signs and wonders in order to mislead. And I think about it even now in our current time where, you know, if there's an end of time and like how do you tell when these signs and wonders, which, you know, obviously are mysterious, we don't know how somebody does that, how does that not, like, make you think, oh, it must, you know what I mean? Like, that makes me, I don't know if I'm explaining it, but it makes me nervous. Like, why is that even allowed for somebody else to have the power to do something so great but be deceptive in the same instance? if that makes
Yes.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, power, I mean, I think what we've seen throughout Mark is that power does not only belong to the good. And maybe that's what you're saying that's making you nervous. We've seen demons. We've seen demons driven off cliffs. We've seen demons taking over people's bodies. The power in the world of Mark is not only on the side of the good. It is on the side of the good, but it is also, there's power in other forces in this world. And a community like this, how could they believe otherwise? Going through what they're going through. This is a community that knows evil, that has seen terrible things. And so if you are in that place, then you know the truth about the world and that there are terrible things out there. So I think that maybe is what you're trying to say. Why is it that there's so much power in these false prophets? There's so much power in these demons in other parts of this. Well, because this is how the world is. This is not a community isolated from darkness who is recalling and writing these things. It's a community that's very much in the middle of a very dark time.
And if I could add to that, like, there's a kind of a science, it's a big word, so hold on, but it's hermeneutics, right? Is like, how do we apply things that are in the past to our own time? And that's a science. And in this case, I think where we've gone in some of these comments, it's not always easy for us to feel like the false messiahs, like isn't necessarily something we come across all the time. But, you know, perhaps there are things in our contemporary culture that are like signs and wonders or things that are marvelous or things that could tempt us away from a path. And I'm on a group of professors at Lawrence talking about AI all the time, right? So, like, how do we handle that in education? Very interesting. So that's a different question. But these are things that are marvelous and amazing. And, perhaps there's a way, perhaps that's something to kind of pull from this, is there's going to be amazing things that blow your mind, or claims that seem really, really big. And maybe that's a way to hear this message, speaking in a very different time, in a different moment, but don't, be slow to respond. Don't just buy in to the next message that seems really powerful. And maybe that's a way we can go with this. You can feel me. I'm kind of trying to think about how do we pull this out of a historical context that meant so much to people, and make it something to us. Yeah, Sheila.
Maybe a little off the track, but if you're familiar with America's Got Talent, sometimes they have people who are like mystics, right?
Huh.
And, I've watched a couple, but I get this really not a good feeling, and I've even don't bother, like, in confession.
Yeah.
And he said, it's good to just not, when they come on, don't watch it, especially if you have that feeling. So then I think, maybe I would have that feeling. Because
Yeah.
they're just, I don't know what they are. They call themselves mystics. They can do, it seems, amazing things.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a false prophet, but I sure don't get a big feeling.
Yeah.
There's
yeah.
something deceptive there, right? And I mean, and religious deception, America's Got Talent, I don't know if that's religious, but religious deception is very dangerous. People that come and claim to be able to heal people through the power of God, and it's really a trick. There is something really damaging about religious deception. Whether you go to a magic show and it's just a magic show and it's entertainment, that's one thing. But if somebody is claiming to do things through the power of God and those are lies, that does give you a really bad feeling. And I think we've all kind of experienced that. There's something especially distasteful or even dangerous about that kind of deception.
I see a couple of hands here. Jermaine, right?
Yeah, I have a question. The four apostles, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, are mentioned. We all have families, and you question, and within those families, it's another pressure that they may not believe the same as you do, or should, and all that. Where do you think Mary is?
Right. So we've seen that in the past. Is Jesus? There seems to be tension between Jesus and his family. Mary isn't being kind of brought in as she doesn't receive any sort of special treatment in Mark. So the way this gets talked about is that this, again, going back to this historical situations, that a lot of these Markan Christians had these family divisions, things that had pulled them away. And you see that here, where it says, for brother will hand over brother to death, the father his child, children will rise up against parents, have them put to death. So there's familial tension and disruption going on. And so when Mark is writing about Jesus, he's emphasizing to people who have felt the ruptures in their families as they follow Jesus, that Jesus too experienced this. And so that's what Mark's dominant message is. I would say it's in the time.
To answer the question, where's Mary? She's not the concern.
Are people like that in this record?
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I think the answer is that the biological family members of Jesus are not the emphasis of this community. Because they have, as Martyn is saying, probably many of them have had painful family divisions themselves. So a story about a loving mother and son who were always, devoted to one another is not the story of this gospel. We will have to wait for Luke for that.
Yes.
We'll have to wait for Luke to get that story, and maybe especially in Luke, and also we see it in John. And but that's not that's not the concern of this. That would be my answer of this.
Curious,
Yeah.
like, what's the rest of his story with other people
Sure.
on the record.
Yeah, so the later Gospels, are going to be emphasizing relationships in different ways. This Gospel is just not, that's not where it's at.
Yeah. Yes.
The thing that jumped out at me is when you're in verse 8, where it's talking about national disasters, wars, famines, earthquakes. But then when you get down through the body, it's brother against brother.
Yeah.
It's personal.
Yeah.
He's bringing it from the national disaster down to a personal.
Yes. At the highest level, there's strife, kingdoms and nations, and then at the lowest level of interfamily relations, that's all happening.
And that's the area you should be working on.
Yes, yes. And tell me your name again? Kevin.
I was just going back to what you just said about we're 2,000 years later, here we are. I read Genesis Day every day.
Mhm.
And in there, there's a picture of someone very saintly person. And the last 2 weeks have been martyrs.
Huh.
And the 60s, it's 70s, it's not that long ago. But there's still that devotion from the person who went to trying to still evangelize. And going back to this pressure of the family and the fear and all that, the people are still dying because people are afraid of that message.
Yeah.
It just continues to repeat.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good point. This isn't felt by the church, especially at this point, but this is going to be a constant as you move forward in church history. So yeah, I think there's a kind of repetition of some of these things that we can hear as we look at church history and see this time. Now, these people, we'll see in just a moment, they were pretty sure the end is coming close, but maybe there's more of a kind of church history presents us with more of a repetition of these events. And that's something we can hear. Yes, Steve?
I guess two things. First of all, what I'm hearing leads me to think, picture historical context. Here's Mark, and he could be pointing to this and saying two things. First of all, hey, you see all this? That was predicted by Jesus. But he might also be saying, and wait a minute, he also said, this may not be the end, so don't think it is. So the second thing I wanted to share was that I had a brother who was all up in arms as he found Christ and was in a fundamental church for a while. And he wanted to impress upon us, the end times are coming, they're coming, the signs are here. And I got to thinking about that, and I realized, what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
My life is going to end. I need to be prepared for that. Does it matter whether it's coincident with the end of times or not? No.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I get out of this is that the tribulations of life will wax and wane.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to live in these times to see the history of that and know that I don't have to panic about it. It isn't going to be solved. Jesus said it wouldn't. We'd always have the poor with us. So we'll always have these problems. And they will be worse at times and better at times.
Yeah.
And so it's part of life.
Yes.
Get used to it and just get through it.
Yeah, and if you know history, as you look back at this history, you think, well, this isn't the only time things have been in upheaval.
And I need to be prepared myself for my demise, whether it's coincident with the end of time or not.
Yeah. And just note, I want to pull out what you're saying and say this is I think a really good strategy for understanding this. If we could go back and talk to the Markan believers, they might say, this is it, the end is coming, we're right there. But for us, 2,000 years later, we're interested in these more cyclical readings of this. This is the sort of thing that the Christian community, that this new faith community is going to face over and over and over again in different ways. And that's a way to draw meaning out of this. But that might not have been, in fact, we should probably push ahead just a little bit to see where this goes. I saw another hand up.
Just one observation. Times of civil unrest, people are always more vulnerable to this type of.
Right.
We need a leader, and just an example would be the rise of Nazism, or an example in our own culture. I think there was a much greater incidence of faith healers and that sort of thing during the Depression years.
Yeah.
So, people are looking for answers, and these these people come forth.
Yeah.
And the worse things get, the more, as you're saying, people are going to turn to these other ways of trying to say, understand it, these religious ways. Should we go on?
Yeah, but let me make one point about 14. This is a historical point. When you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. And this is actually what happens for the Christian community. In 68, a couple years before the full destruction and slaughter that happens in Jerusalem, this Christian community in Jerusalem is going to say, the writing's on the wall, we're going to flee across the Jordan to another place. And that community, so this is describing actually something that happened, and maybe even a memory of the fact that it was difficult, for certain people, pregnant. Not the time to be hobbled in any way as you're going out. So this is something that also reflects the experience of the early Christians is knowing we got to get out of here. Something bad's going to happen. And then Mark says in verse 23, be watchful. I have told it all to you beforehand. So that's kind of a break in this whole chapter. He's describing things, and these are things that this community would say, okay, that's happened, that's happened, that's happened, that's happened. Now you get a break. And now what's the next thing? And that's where we push forward.
Okay, verse 24. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of the sky.
And just as a note, so we've reached this point, we're right here, and then what's going to happen is this end. And Jesus is putting this together this is from the book of Isaiah, the skies being darkened and so on, and then the book of Daniel, the Son of Man coming. So again, the near term is Jesus is just about to go into the passion, but here we are looking after that, like the return at the end of time. So Jesus is pushing us in any reading, pushing us way into the future and using the Old Testament in order to explain the next thing.
Learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, know that he is near at the gates. Amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be watchful, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It is like a man traveling abroad. He leaves home and places his servants in charge, each with his work, and orders the gatekeeper to be on the watch. Watch, therefore. You do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or in the morning. May he not come suddenly and find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all. Watch.
We got to the end.
Yeah.
What do you make of this? We had another fig tree. We saw the fig tree in earlier. I'd ask you to talk among yourselves. We only have 5 minutes, so maybe anything that's kind of striking you there in that passage. Yeah.
We didn't really talk about it even a little bit earlier where, it says, the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. And as he's talking about this very sort of end of time and, don't let all of a sudden it happen and you're not ready. I think in maybe a dark way, because they're going through these dark times, this is also sort of a message of hope or like instruction. Like you cannot give up on this. You have to be ready all the time because you don't know when that's going to happen. But it's those that stay true the entire way through that are going to, reap the rewards and be safe.
Yes. Yeah. You're in this, hold on,
Yeah.
keep your hope, and you will get through this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This always was was a stumbling stone for me when it says, this generation will not pass away until all these things have come to pass. Well, they didn't come to pass
Right.
before they all died.
Right. And this is the second time that Mark has given us this. In 9:1, Mark says, he also, Jesus said to them, Amen, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come in power. So that was in 9:1. And then we get that same idea here, number time. Amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. And a generation, you can say 40 years. That's the number of the people in the wilderness, the generation of Israelites wandering in the wilderness, 40 years. Again, just look at the numbers. 30 AD, 70 AD, 40 years. So if you think of this as being something written in, say, the year after 70 AD, the message of Mark seems to be that this is a near-term event that we're talking about, this end of time. And that also explains some of the way that Mark is put together. It's not some kind of a beautiful literary composition. It's written to get a message across and to encourage people. And that number is very striking to me, 30 to 70, 40 years, a generation. There would be that's to me a kind of marker for when Mark was put together, is that there was this expectation that you could have been very young at the ministry, at the end of Jesus' ministry, and you would be living here in these end days. And that is a hard thing to get our mind around. What do we do with the fact that we're obviously 2,000 years later?
It didn't happen. And that's the history of the church, trying to come to terms with that. You know, after these generations start to pass away, well, what are you going to do? If this church is going to continue, we're going to need a structure. We're going to need a hierarchy. We're going to need bishops. We're going to need churches. We're going to need, all of the things that allow an organization to continue to pass from generation to the next. But at this time, none of those things would have been in place because they didn't expect that would have ever happened. And so there was tension in these subsequent generations about, are we betraying the message if we build a big cathedral and have a bishop? Because doesn't that say that we don't believe that the end of days are coming? And so those things had to develop over time when it didn't come about. Yes, Heidi.
Is there any, I'm assuming there's been discussion on whether the word generation sort of translates to the same way that we see it, because they also talk about on day one, God did this, and on day two, he did this, and I've always kind of believed nobody knows that a day is 24 hours then. That could have been thousands of years between each step of his creation of the world, right? We talk about it in days, but maybe it wasn't really days. So when he says generation, does that really mean that 30 to 40 years, or is he talking about this new people that have come to know him and will come to believe, and meaning all of us, all 2,000 years of us?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Those are the sort of discussions that come about with this passage, because we have to do something with the fact that we're still here. And so you can see generation as being this new group, this new organization, this people that I'm calling in and inaugurating. But on the other hand, it's very striking that we're in that, this seems to be addressing the issues of 70. We're in that kind of generational end. And so that's where the interpreters kind of, well, that didn't happen, so we're going to be moving towards this other meaning. Or, well, this was a reflection of the early church and really, really wanting to think and understanding this is the end. And so you can kind of choose your direction there. I tend to go with the idea that there was this kind of strong apocalyptic bent in the early church, and their memory of Jesus was shaped by that expectation, and that's what we get here in the gospel. Steve, did you have I saw a hand. Oh, no, Bob.
Well, my question was, end times have always been a great motivator for different religious
Yes.
groups. train's leaving the station, you better get on board, give a little money, and make sure we can make the trip. At what point did the early Christians start to doubt that it was going to happen in their lifetime?
Yeah, you,
I mean, I would say in that, that second century, right, the 100s, we start to get some of the early church fathers really doing the kind of theology and the groundwork theology. I wouldn't, and by theology, I mean, just like we haven't worked out the exact relationship yet between Jesus and his Father and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, the dual nature of Jesus as fully God and fully human. That work is only possible, if you look at it on the positive side, when there's time to do it. So in the second and third centuries, really, and then a lot of the foundation, theological and physical foundation and hierarchical foundation of the church is starting to come into existence at that time. But there's still tension,
and that might be,
is this a betrayal?
I think that's a good place to end. We're at the end of our time, but I started out talking about my own experience growing up in an evangelical church and these end time scenarios, which never ended, right? Rapture and all that kind of stuff. The extent to which these traditions of the church kind of take over and the interpretation of the Bible and move things more toward, hey, we got to kind of settle in and be here and institutionalize this. And so there's a way in which the church has kind of built upon, and in some cases maybe even shifted our expectation and how to see some of these passages. Maybe that's a place to stop.
And we will not be,
Right.
just as a reminder, we won't be here next week. We'll be in Florida.
So we won't be here next week, but we will be here that week after. That'll be a good one because we're going to be heading into Palm Sunday, and we're going to be reading about the Last Supper and the Passion Week. So it'll be a great one to kind of set you up for that next week.
So we won't be here next week. We will be here on March 27th, and then the following week is Good Friday. Again, we won't be here.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody.
We'll have to pray that your travels go well.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Wednesday, so hopefully the blizzard will be behind us.
Yeah.